thought I was an only child for 32 years until a simple DNA test revealed I have 10 half-siblings scattered across 3 states, and my father had been living a triple life that would make a soap opera writer jealous. Growing up, it was just me, my mom, and my dad in our little ranch house in suburban Ohio. I was Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, the apple of my parents' eyes, or at least that's what I thought. My childhood was pretty normal. Piano lessons on Tuesdays, soccer practice on weekends, and family dinners where my dad would tell the same corny jokes that made my mom roll her eyes and me giggle uncontrollably. My dad, Michael Thompson, was a traveling salesman for medical equipment. He'd be gone 3 or 4 days a week, sometimes more, driving his beat-up Honda Civic to hospitals and clinics across the Midwest. Mom always said he was working so hard to give us a good life, and I believed her. When he came home, he'd bring me little gifts: a snow globe from Chicago, a keychain from Indianapolis, or my favorite, a stuffed elephant from the Cleveland Zoo that I still have on my dresser. Dad was my hero. He taught me how to ride a bike, helped with my math homework, even though he'd scratch his head and say, "They didn't teach it this way" when I was in school. Never missed a single one of my soccer games. When I scored my first goal in 5th grade, he jumped up from the bleachers so fast he spilled his coffee all over Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor. I was mortified, but secretly thrilled that he was so proud. My mom, Linda, worked part-time at the local library. She was quiet, gentle, and had this way of making everyone feel special. She depacked my lunch with little notes that said things like, "You going to have a great day. Remember, you're braver than you believe." Looking back, I wonder if those notes were as much for her as they were for me. Our family felt complete, even if it was small. My parents seemed happy together, though I noticed they didn't really have friends over much. Most of my friends had parents who went to barbecues and block parties, but we kept to ourselves. Dad would say we were homebodies, and that family time was more important than anything else. Mom would just smile and agree. I was the classic only child, maybe a little spoiled. Definitely used to being the center of attention, but also independent. I learned to entertain myself during Dad's business trips, and I became really close with my mom during those times. We'd have girls' nights where we'd paint our nails, watch old movies, and eat ice cream straight from the container. She'd tell me stories about her childhood in Michigan, but she never talked much about how she and Dad met. When I asked, she'd just say it was love at first sight, and change the subject. When I went away to college at Ohio State, the transition was harder than I expected. I was used to being the only kid, and suddenly I was surrounded by people who had siblings, step-siblings, half-siblings, these big, complicated families that seemed both chaotic and wonderful. My roommate Jessica had 4 brothers and 2 sisters, and her phone never stopped ringing with family drama. I felt a little jealous sometimes, wondering what it would be like to have a sibling to share secrets with, or fight over the TV remote. After college, I moved to Columbus and started working as a graphic designer. I met my husband, David, at a coffee shop downtown. He was reading a book about astronomy, and I made some joke about him being spaced out. It was terrible, but he laughed anyway, and we ended up talking for 3 hours. David came from a huge Italian family, the kind where Sunday dinners require 3 tables and everyone talks at once. His family embraced me immediately, but I could tell they found it odd that I never mentioned aunts, uncles, or cousins. My family tree was more like a family telephone pole. David and I got married 2 years later, and my parents seemed genuinely happy for us. Dad walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and Mom cried through the entire ceremony. At the reception, I watched David's family, all those siblings and in-laws and cousins dancing and laughing together, and I felt that familiar pang of wondering what I'd missed by being an only child. My parents aged gracefully, and Dad eventually retired from his sales job when I turned 30. Seemed relieved to be home more, and he took up gardening with an enthusiasm that surprised all of us. Mom started volunteering at the animal shelter, and they seemed content in their quiet life. We'd have dinner together once a month, and everything felt stable and predictable. But there were little things that nagged at me. Dad was terrible with technology, but sometimes I'd catch him texting quickly and then putting his phone face down on the table. When I asked who he was texting, he'd say it was just old work contacts, or nobody important. Mom seemed to accept this, but I noticed she'd get a little tense when it happened. There were also the business trips that continued even after retirement. Dad would disappear for a weekend here and there, claiming he was visiting old clients or going to medical equipment conventions. It seemed weird for a retired person, but I figured he was just having trouble letting go of his career. The thing that should have been the biggest red flag was how little I knew about Dad's family. He said his parents died when he was young, and he was an only child too. No cousins, no family reunions, no old photo albums. Mom's family was small too, and most of her relatives had passed away. So our family history felt like this tiny, isolated island. Looking back, I realized how many questions I never asked and how many answers never quite made sense. But when you love someone and trust them completely, you don't interrogate their every word. You just accept that this is your normal, your family, your truth. The first crack in my perfectly ordered world came on a random Tuesday in March. I was having lunch with David at our favorite deli when I casually mentioned that I was thinking about doing one of those DNA ancestry tests. It was 2019 and everyone seemed to be doing them. Jessica from work had discovered she was 12% Scandinavian, and my neighbor found out she had relatives in Ireland she never knew about. I think it would be fun to see where the Thompsons really came from, I said, taking a bite of my pastrami sandwich. Dad always says we're German, but he's never been sure about Mom's side. David nodded enthusiastically. You should totally do it. Maybe you'll find some long-lost cousins or something exciting. That evening, I mentioned the idea to my parents during our monthly dinner. The reaction was immediate and unsettling. Dad dropped his fork and it clattered against his plate loud enough to make us all jump. Mom's face went pale, and she reached for her water glass with a shaking hand. Those tests aren't very accurate, Dad said quickly, his voice higher than usual. Plus, they sell your information to companies. I read about it online. Very dangerous for your privacy. This was coming from a man who still asked me to help him send emails. The idea that he was researching DNA privacy policies seemed unlikely. I just think it could be interesting, I pressed gently. Maybe we'd learn something cool about our heritage. Oh, finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah, honey, some things are better left alone. We know who we are. Isn't that enough? The conversation ended abruptly when Dad announced he needed to check on something in the garage, and Mom started clearing dishes, even though we hadn't finished eating. I left that night feeling confused and a little hurt. Why were they so opposed to something so simple and fun? Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I started paying more attention to my parents' behavior, and the more I watched, the more questions arose. Dad's phone habits became more obvious. He'd step outside to take certain calls. And he kept his phone with him constantly, even taking it to the bathroom. When I jokingly asked if he was having an affair, he got defensive in a way that seemed out of proportion to my teasing. Then there were the weekends. Dad had been taking these solo trips once or twice a month, claiming they were to visit old colleagues or attend industry events. But one Saturday I decided to surprise him with coffee and drove to the hotel he said he was staying at in Dayton. The desk clerk looked at me like I was crazy when I asked for Michael Thompson's room. I had no one registered under that name. When I called Dad's cell phone, he answered on the first ring, sounding panicked. Sarah, what's wrong? Is your mother okay? I'm fine, Dad. I just wanted to surprise you with coffee. Where are you staying? The Hampton Inn said they don't have you registered. There was a long pause. Oh, plans changed. I'm staying with Bob Mitchell. You remember Bob from work. His wife made dinner, so I didn't need the hotel room. I'd never heard of Bob Mitchell in my life, and Dad had mentioned dozens of work colleagues over the years. But I said okay, and drove home, feeling stupid for being suspicious of my own father. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. I was at my parents' house helping Mom plant her spring garden when Dad's phone rang. He was inside watching TV, and his phone was on the patio table where he left it after showing us photos of his tomato seedlings. The caller ID said Linda M. My mom's name is Linda Thompson. This said Linda M. without really thinking. I picked up the phone. A woman's voice, warm and familiar, in the way that only comes from years of intimacy. It said, Hey, honey, Emma has a soccer game at 2. Will you make it? I hung up without saying anything, my hands shaking. Mom was kneeling in the dirt, completely absorbed in her petunias, humming quietly to herself. Dad came outside at that moment, saw his phone in my hand, and his face went through about 6 different emotions in 3 seconds. Who was that? He asked, trying to sound casual, but failing miserably. Wrong number, I lied, handing him the phone.
Oh.
But I couldn't let it go. That night I went home and created fake social media accounts. I searched for Linda M. in cities where Dad traveled for work. I found 3 different women named Linda in Michigan, Indiana, Pennsylvania, who were friends with or tagged in photos with men who looked remarkably similar to my father. One of them, Linda Morrison, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, had a Facebook page full of photos that made my blood run cold. There was my dad, definitely my dad at birthday parties, school events, and family dinners. But instead of me, there were other kids. A teenage girl who looked exactly like me at that age. A boy who had dad's distinctive cleft chin. Photos dating back years, all with captions like Mike's home for Emma's recital, family pizza night with my love. I spent hours scrolling through these photos, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. In Pennsylvania, I found Linda Patterson, also with photos of my dad and 2 more children. These families looked happy, normal, complete. Just like mine had always seemed. The worst part was seeing how natural Dad looked in these photos. He wasn't living some secret double life reluctantly. He was fully present, fully engaged with these other families. In one photo from Linda Morrison's page, he was helping a little boy, maybe 8 years old, with a bike. The same patient expression on his face that I remembered from my own childhood. I closed my laptop and sat in my dark living room staring at nothing. David found me there an hour later, tears streaming down my face, unable to explain what I'd discovered. I think I finally managed to say, I need to do that DNA test after all. I was sitting in my Honda Civic in the parking lot of a Starbucks when the email arrived. David was inside getting his coffee, and I was scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the anxiety that had become my constant companion. The subject line was simple. Your ancestry results are in. Right? My finger hovered over the email for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds. This was it. The moment that would either confirm my worst fears or prove that I had been paranoid and destructive over nothing. But deep down, I already knew what I was going to find. I clicked the link and entered my login information. The website loaded slowly, or maybe it just felt that way because my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. David came back to the car just as the results page fully loaded, and he must have seen something in my face because he immediately asked what was wrong. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at the screen. The ethnicity results were what I expected. Mostly German and Irish, some English, a touch of Scandinavian. But below that was a section that made my vision blur. DNA matches. The closest matches weren't distant cousins or great-aunts. They were labeled as close family, first cousins or closer, and there were 10 of them. 10. The first name on the list was Emma Thompson Morrison. Estimated relationship. Half-sister. She'd taken the test 6 months ago. Below her was Marcus Patterson, half-brother. Then Chloe Patterson, half-sister. The list continued. Jake Morrison, Lily Thompson Morrison, Sam Patterson, Tyler Morrison, Grace Patterson, Alex Morrison, and Kevin Patterson. 10 half-siblings. 10 children who shared my father's DNA. 10 people who existed in the world, living their lives, never knowing about me, just like I'd never known about them. Sarah, David said urgently, what is it? You're scaring me. I handed him the phone, unable to form words. He looked at the screen and I watched his face change from confusion to understanding to anger. Holy shit, he whispered. Sarah, this is insane. I started laughing, but it came out wrong, hysterical and high-pitched. Insane doesn't begin to cover it. I have 10 half-siblings, David. 10. That means Dad has been lying to us for my entire life. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the phone. I clicked on Emma's profile. She was 19 years old, from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Her profile picture showed a young woman who looked disturbingly like me at that age. Same dark hair, same hazel eyes, same smile. In her brief bio, she'd written, just curious about my dad's side of the family. Marcus Patterson was 17, from Pittsburgh. His profile said, he was hoping to find relatives for a school genealogy project. Chloe was 21, also from Pittsburgh. Her bio mentioned being adopted and looking for biological connections. Wait, adopted? I clicked through more profiles, and a pattern emerged. Several of them mentioned being adopted or raised by single mothers. Emma and Tyler Morrison seemed to be from the same family. Probably full siblings who shared the Linda Morrison ID found on Facebook. Marcus, Chloe, Sam, and Grace Patterson appeared to be from Linda Patterson's family. But Jake, Lily, Alex, and Kevin were from different locations entirely. "David," I said slowly, "I don't think Dad just has 3 families. I think he's been doing this for decades, all across the Midwest." The car felt like it was spinning. I rolled down the window, gasping for air. David put his hand on my back, rubbing gentle circles, but nothing could calm the storm in my chest. I clicked back to the main results page and looked at the relationship estimates. The DNA didn't lie. These were definitely my half-siblings, with confidence levels ranging from 95% to 99.9%. Some of them had taken the test recently, within the last year, which meant they were actively looking for family connections. "Oh God," I said suddenly. "What if they reach out to me? What if they message me through the app?" As if summoned by my words, a notification popped up at the top of the screen. "You have 3 new messages." My vision went black around the edges. 3 messages. 3 of my half-siblings had already seen the results and reached out. David grabbed the phone when I started hyperventilating. "Breathe, Sarah. Just breathe. We'll figure this out." But how do you figure out something like this? How do you process the fact that your entire understanding of your family, your identity, your father's character has been obliterated in a single moment? I thought about all those business trips, all those weekends away, all those conferences and client meetings that had seemed so normal, so necessary. Dad hadn't been selling medical equipment. He'd been maintaining an empire of families, traveling from one wife and set of children to another, like some kind of domestic traveling salesman. The messages were still there, waiting to be opened. Part of me wanted to throw the phone out the window and pretend this had never happened. But another part of me, the part that had always wondered what it would be like to have siblings, was desperately curious about these people who shared my DNA. "I can't read them," I told David. "I can't handle whatever they're going to say." "You don't have to read them now," he said gently. "We can go home, process this, and decide what to do next." But I couldn't stop staring at the numbers. 10 half-siblings, spread across at least 4 states. Some who seemed to know about Dad. Others who were clearly searching for answers about a father they'd never known. How many women had Dad deceived? How many children had grown up believing they were his only family? How many lives had he compartmentalized and managed like some kind of twisted business portfolio? As David drove us home, I clutched the phone in my lap. Those 3 unread messages burning like radioactive waste. Everything I thought I knew about my life had just become fiction. And the truth was so much stranger and more horrible than anything I could have imagined. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't concentrate on anything except the images burned into my memory. My father, my dad, living complete lives with other families. David had stayed up with me until 3 in the morning while I showed him the Facebook photos. His face went through the same stages of disbelief and horror that mine had. "You have to confront him," David said over coffee. "Maybe there's an explanation." What explanation could there possibly be? I'd seen birthday parties spanning years, Christmas mornings, family vacations. These weren't affairs. These were entire parallel lives. "I can't confront him yet," I said, stirring my coffee mindlessly. What if I'm wrong? What if this is some crazy coincidence and I destroy our family over a misunderstanding? David looked at me like I was grasping at straws, which I probably was. "Sarah, that man in those photos is definitely your father. Those women are calling him honey and talking about soccer games." I knew he was right, but admitting it felt like stepping off a cliff. If my dad was living multiple lives, then everything I believed about my childhood, my family, my identity, was built on lies. The bedtime stories, the soccer games, the pride in his voice when I graduated college, was any of it real, or was I just one performance in a traveling show? The DNA test felt like the only way to know for sure. If Dad had other children, they might have taken tests too. The databases were huge now, and if any of my potential half-siblings had submitted their DNA, I'd find them. I ordered the kit that afternoon, sitting in my car in the Target parking lot like I was buying drugs instead of a harmless genealogy test. My hands were shaking as I filled out the online forms. Under "Why are you taking this test?" I checked Find Relatives, but what I really wanted to check was confirm my entire life isn't a lie. The kit arrived 2 days later in a small, innocent-looking box. Inside were simple instructions, a plastic tube, and a prepaid return envelope. Such a tiny thing to potentially explode my world. I stared at that tube for 3 days. It sat on my kitchen counter, and every time I walked by it, my stomach would clench. David would catch me looking at it and ask if I was ready. I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready to learn that my father was a stranger. On Friday night, I called Jessica, my old roommate who'd done the test the year before. I didn't tell her about the Facebook photos or my suspicions. I just said I was nervous about potentially finding unknown relatives. "Oh my God, that's the best part," she said excitedly. "I found 3 second cousins, and we're planning a reunion next summer. It's like getting bonus family members." It's bonus family members. The phrase stuck with me. What if instead of losing the family I thought I had, I gained siblings I never knew existed? What if somewhere out there were people who'd grown up wondering, like I had, what it would be like to have brothers and sisters? God. But then the darker thoughts would creep in. What if these other children got more of Dad's time than I did? What if he loved them more? What if I was the afterthought, the third family, the least important stop on his tour of deception? Saturday morning, I woke up determined to get it over with. I brushed my teeth, rinsed my mouth with water, and spit into the tube. The instructions said to fill it to the line, which was harder than it sounded and grosser than I'd expected. I sealed it up, put it in the prepaid envelope, and drove straight to the post office before I could change my mind. The postal worker, a cheerful elderly man, weighed the envelope and stamped it. "Have a good day, hun," he said, and I wanted to tell him that, depending on what was in that little tube of spit, I might never have a truly good day again. The processing time was 4 to 6 weeks. I marked the date on my calendar and tried to go back to normal life, but normal felt impossible. Every interaction with my parents became loaded with subtext. When Dad asked about work, I wondered if he asked his other daughters the same questions. When Mom mentioned a recipe she wanted to try, I wondered if she knew about Linda. And Linda Patterson? Or if she was as much a victim in this as I was? I started paying attention to things I'd never noticed before. Dad's car had a lot of miles on it for someone who claimed to mostly drive around. Ohio. There were coffee shops in his GPS history for cities he'd never mentioned visiting. He had a separate credit card that mail came for, but that he always collected from the mailbox himself. 2 weeks into the waiting period, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. I drove to the library where Mom worked and waited in the parking lot until her shift ended. When she came out, I followed her car to the grocery store, then to the dry cleaner, then finally back home. At each stop, I watched her interact with people. Friendly but reserved, polite but not overly talkative. She seemed like a woman who kept to herself, who didn't ask too many questions. Did she know? Was she complicit? Or was she another victim of Dad's elaborate deception? Looking at her slight frame and gentle manner, I couldn't imagine her knowingly sharing her husband with 2 other women. But I also couldn't imagine how someone could be so thoroughly deceived for over 30 years. The uncertainty was eating me alive. I started losing sleep, snapping at David, and making mistakes at work. My boss asked if everything was okay, and I wanted to scream that no, nothing was okay, and it might never be okay again. For weeks in, I got an email notification that made my heart stop. "Your DNA results are ready." I spent 3 days pacing around my house like a caged animal, before I finally worked up the courage to read the messages from my half-siblings. David had taken time off work to be with me, which was good because I was in no state to be alone. The first message was from Emma Thompson Morrison, the 19-year-old from Grand Rapids, who looked like my twin. "Hi, Sarah. I saw we're a DNA match as half-sisters. This is so exciting. I've been wondering about my dad's side of the family for years. My mom always said his name was Michael Thompson and that he traveled for work, but she never wanted to talk about him much. Do you know anything about our father? I'd love to connect." The second was from Marcus Patterson in Pittsburgh. "Hey there, looks like we're half-siblings. I'm 17, and I've been raised by my mom my whole life. She told me my biological father's name was Mike Thompson, but that he couldn't be part of my life. I'm not looking for drama, just curious about my biological family. Are you in touch with him?" The third message hit me like a freight train. It was from Tyler Morrison, Emma's brother. "Sarah, I can't believe I'm writing this. I just figured out we have a half-sister, and honestly, we've been hoping to find family on our dad's side for years. Our mom died 2 years ago, and before she passed, she told us the truth about our father. She said his name was Michael Thompson, and that he had another family in Ohio, But she made us promise never to look for him, because it would hurt innocent people. But after seeing your DNA match, I had to reach out. We're not trying to cause trouble. We just want to know we're not alone in the world. I read that message 5 times before the full impact hit me. Tyler's mother, Linda Morrison, was dead. She'd died knowing about me, about my mother, about Dad's deception. She'd protected us by keeping her children from reaching out, even though it meant they grew up without their father. David, I said, my voice cracking, Linda Morrison is dead. One of Dad's other wives died and she knew about us. She knew about Mom and me, and she kept her kids from contacting us to protect us. David looked up from his laptop where he'd been researching bigamy laws in Ohio. Jesus, Sarah, how many lives has your father destroyed? That question haunted me as I crafted responses to each message. What could I say? Father's my father too, and he's been lying to all of us for decades. He's not the man any of us thought he was. I decided to start with Emma, since she seemed the most optimistic. Hi, Emma. Yes, we are half-sisters. This is as shocking for me as it is for you. I grew up thinking Michael Thompson was my devoted father, and that I was his only child. I'm 32 years old and I live in Ohio with my husband. I'm still processing all of this, but I'd be open to talking more if you want to exchange phone numbers. Within an hour, my phone rang. Emma's voice was exactly what I'd expected from her messages. Young, excited, nervous. Sarah, oh my God, I can't believe I'm talking to my sister. This is so crazy. It's definitely crazy, I agreed, though crazy didn't begin to cover the magnitude of the situation. So you really didn't know about us? Tyler and I always wondered if Dad had other kids, but Mom said we shouldn't assume anything. Emma, I said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. Does our father still visit you and Tyler? There was a pause. Well, not really visits. But he sends money every month, and he calls on our birthdays and holidays. He came to my high school graduation last year. My heart sank. Yeah, because he still lives with me and my mother, full time. He's been married to her for 33 years. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long I thought she'd hung up. Emma, are you there? I'm here, she said quietly. I'm just trying to understand. Are you saying our father is married to your mother right now while also being our father? That's exactly what I'm saying. The conversation continued for 2 hours. Emma told me about growing up believing her father was a traveling salesman who could unlive with them because of work, but who loved them very much. Tyler got on the phone and shared similar stories. They'd grown up in a nice house, never wanted for anything, and believed their father was doing his best under difficult circumstances. We thought he was a hero, Tyler said. Mom always said he was sacrificing his own happiness to provide for us while maintaining his other job and family responsibilities. Other job and family responsibilities? Linda Morrison had known the truth and had spun it into a story that protected her children's image of their father. While acknowledging that they were and his only priority, after that call, I knew I had to confront my father. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of his deception. I responded to Marcus Patterson and learned that he and his siblings, 3 of them, had been told their father could be in their lives because he was married to someone else and it would be too complicated. Linda Patterson had been more honest about the situation, but she'd also kept her children from reaching out. Over the next week, I connected with 6 more half-siblings. The stories were variations on the same theme. Dad was a traveling salesman who loved them but couldn't be with them full-time due to work or complicated family situations. Some had been told he was married to someone else. Others had been told he had responsibilities they were too young to understand. What struck me most was how carefully he'd managed each situation. The money, the birthday calls, the graduation appearances. He maintained just enough contact to be considered a good father while never fully committing to any one family. Finally, on a Sunday evening, I drove to my parents' house. Dad was in the garage working on his tomato seedlings, completely oblivious to the fact that his 30-year deception had just exploded. Hey, sweetheart, he said when he saw me. You're early for dinner? Dad, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to talk. The look on my father's face when I said those 4 words will haunt me forever. It wasn't surprise or confusion. It was the look of someone who'd been expecting this moment for 30 years and had finally run out of time. "What about honey?" he asked, but his voice had already changed. The casual warmth was gone, replaced by something guarded and careful. I pulled out my phone and showed him the DNA results page with all 10 half-siblings listed. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then sat down heavily on an overturned milk crate he used as a stool. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. 3 weeks. "Since I saw the Facebook photos of you with Linda Morrison's family." He nodded slowly, like he was checking items off a mental list. "What do you want to know?" The question was so simple, but the answer was impossibly complex. What did I want to know? Everything and nothing. How he'd managed it logistically, emotionally, morally, whether he loved any of us, or all of us, or none of us, whether my entire childhood had been authentic, or just another performance in his elaborate show. "I want to know if you love me," I said, and immediately felt like a child again. Dad looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw him as he really was. Not a hero or a villain, but a deeply flawed man who'd made impossible choices and then spent decades trying to make them work. "I love all of you," he said simply. That's the problem. Over the next 2 hours, the story came out in pieces. He'd met my mother first in 1987, and they'd gotten married the following year. He'd started his medical equipment job, which did involve real travel. In 1990, during a business trip to Grand Rapids, he'd met Linda Morrison at a hospital where she worked as a nurse. They'd started an affair that became something deeper. "I should have divorced your mother and married Linda," he said, "but I couldn't bear the thought of hurting either of you. So I told Linda I was divorced, but that the custody arrangement was complicated. And I told your mother I was just working more to provide better for our family." The lies had multiplied exponentially. When Linda Morrison got pregnant with Tyler, Dad had to create an entire fictional life to explain why he could only visit on weekends. When he met Linda Patterson a few years later, the deception became even more elaborate. "I never meant for it to go on so long," he said. "Every year I told myself I'd figure out how to make it right, how to choose, how to fix it. But every year there were more children, more birthdays, more graduations, more reasons I couldn't walk away from any of you. The most shocking revelation was that this had been going on even longer than I'd realized. Some of my half-siblings were older than me. I hadn't been his first child or his first deception. I'd been born into a web of lies that was already years in the making. Does Mom know?" He shook his head. "She suspects something, I think. She's asked questions over the years. But I've been so careful to keep everything separate. That night, I told my mother everything. Watching her world implode was almost harder than discovering the truth myself. She aged 10 years in the space of our conversation, her shoulders sagging under the weight of realizing that her entire adult life had been built on lies. I knew, she whispered after I finished. Not the details, but I knew something was wrong. I just chose not to look too hard, because I was afraid of what I'd find. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Mom kept the house. Dad moved into a small apartment across town. The financial settlements were complicated because he'd been supporting multiple families for decades. His retirement savings had been spread thin. The most complicated part was figuring out what to do about all of us, his children. Some of my half-siblings wanted nothing to do with him after learning the truth. Emma and Tyler decided to maintain a relationship, but with clear boundaries. Marcus and several of the others cut contact entirely. As for me, I'm still figuring it out. The man who taught me to ride a bike and never missed a soccer game is the same man who systematically deceived multiple families for 30 years. The father who made me feel like the center of his universe was giving the same performance to 10 other children. I've met 7 of my half-siblings in person now. We're also different ages, different backgrounds, different relationships with Dad, but we share something unique. We're the children of a man who loved us enough to lie to the world, but not enough to tell us the truth. Emma and I have become genuinely close. She's studying nursing, just like her mother did, and she has this optimism that I envy. Tyler is more guarded, but we text regularly. He's protective of Emma in a way that reminds me of how I imagine a big brother should be. Marcus wants nothing to do with any of us, which I understand. Some of the younger ones are still processing everything. What's strange is that, despite the circumstances, having siblings feels natural. We share mannerisms I never noticed in myself, similar senses of humor, even comparable taste in music. DNA is powerful, and growing up with the same father, even part-time, shaped us in ways that transcend the lies. Mom has started therapy, and slowly, she's building a life that's entirely her own for the first time since she was 22. She's dating someone now, a kind widower from her book club, and seeing her laugh genuinely again makes my heart ache with gratitude. Dad calls me every few weeks. Conversations are awkward and stilted, nothing like the easy warmth we used to share. He's trying to maintain relationships with as many of his children as will allow it, but it's complicated. Some of us don't want to share holidays or special occasions. Others refuse to be in the same room with him. Last month, he had a minor heart attack, Emma called to tell me. I found myself in the strange position of coordinating with siblings I barely knew to figure out hospital visits and care decisions. I created a group text chain, Dad's Kids, that now has 11 people in it. Sometimes we use it to share medical updates, sometimes to vent about the situation, and occasionally someone shares a funny memory that reminds us we're more than just victims of his deception. The hardest part is that I can't hate him completely. The love he showed me was real, even if it wasn't exclusive. The pride in his voice at my graduation, the tears in his eyes at my wedding, the way he held me when I was scared. Those moments weren't performances. They were just incomplete truths. I think about Linda Morrison sometimes, the woman who died protecting her children's image of their father and shielding my family from pain we weren't ready for. She knew about all of us and chose to carry that burden alone. There's something both tragic and heroic about that sacrifice. The DNA test that started all this continues to reveal new connections. 2 more half-siblings have appeared in the last 6 months. Apparently, Dad's deception goes back even further than we knew. At this point, we joked that we could field our own baseball team. David has been incredible through all of this. When I asked him if he regretted marrying into such a complicated family, he said, "I didn't marry your family, Sarah. I married you. Everything else is just bonus chaos." He's developed relationships with several of my half-siblings too, becoming the brother-in-law they never expected to have. Looking back, I realized the signs were always there. Separate phone, the weekend trips, the way Dad never had family photos at work, how we never had extended family gatherings. I just trusted him so completely that I never questioned the gaps in his stories. Trust is a funny thing. Once it's broken the way ours was, it changes how you see everything. I find myself questioning other relationships, looking for inconsistencies and lies where there probably aren't any. Therapy helps, but some wounds to your ability to trust take time to heal. The strangest part is that this experience has given me something I always wanted: siblings, while taking away something I thought I had. A father I could trust completely. It's a trait I never would have chosen. But I'm learning to live with the complexity of loving someone who hurt me so profoundly. Emma graduated from nursing school last month, and 5 of us went to the ceremony. Sitting in that auditorium with people who shared my DNA but not my history, watching our half-sister achieve her dreams, I felt something I'd never experienced before. It wasn't the exclusive love I'd grown up with, but it was real family. Messy, complicated, chosen family. Dad wasn't there. Emma had uninvited him, saying she wanted this day to be about moving forward, not looking back. When she walked across that stage, she looked right at us and smiled, and in that moment, I understood something important. We get to decide what family means now. The lies that created us don't have to define us. We're more than the casualties of one man's inability to choose. We're siblings, we're survivors, and we're building something authentic from the wreckage of his deception. Now, when people ask if I'm an only child, I laugh and say, it's complicated, because it is. But complicated doesn't mean broken, and broken doesn't mean worthless. Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that form in spite of circumstances, not because of them. My DNA test showed I have 10 half-siblings, but more than that, it showed me that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. Family doesn't have to be traditional to be true.